Hello and welcome back to the Nasty Metal, a production channel here at YouTube, and welcome to another album of the week. This is episode 103. So, if you had seen episode 102, which was my album of the week spotlight on Breaker from Accept, at the end of that episode, I did announce what was going to be this week's album pick. So here we are. And the album that I picked is the 5th studio album from Onslaught. It is Sounds of Violence, which was originally released on January 28th, 2011. Though, of course, the labels such as AFM Records, Spiritual Beast in Japan, which was actually on January 11th, actually. So very early. Japan got it early, and they always get things early at times. And then, of course, on February 8th, 2011, it was then distributed in Argentina through, of course, Del Imaginario Discos. There you go. So, 10 years. 10 years for this album. I know I didn't get to spotlight this album on at least around its anniversary day, but still... it's better now than ever, and this is probably going to be the only modern Onslaught album that I will be spotlighting on this channel. So, there you go. So, for this album, since I was still relatively new to this band, I wasn't quite aware of a lot of the lineups, but let's definitely run through at least most of some of this as well. I mean, this album was recorded through the months of August to October of 2010, and it was all recorded at Hansen Studios in Ribe, Denmark, which of course was owned, seemed to have been by producer Jacob Hansen. So there you go. And again, so let's definitely run through the lineup here. So here's the lineup for this band. Well, we see that we got original drummer Steve Grice here. We still have Cy Keeler on vocals, who had been back in the band. It seems like since 2004 he had been back in the band. Again, he debuted in the band on 1986's The Force. So we have, of course, as far as members for this album, Andy Roser Davies and Jeff Williams, who all debuted on this album. And then, of course, we still have one of the most lasting members in this band. Onslaught is pretty much this member. It is Nigel Rocket, guitar player and songwriter. Nigel Rocket has pretty much been the most consistent member for Onslaught. So, and again, he's still the one that still runs this band. It's pretty much, again, Onslaught is Nigel Rocket. So there's your members here for this album. And so now, finally, let's get into the songs here. My copy of the album is, of course, the one that was released here in the United States. It is again, on AFM Records, and it's 11 songs. We got 11 because there's at least a bonus track here at the end. So these 11 songs are, and all clocks in at 47 minutes and 53 seconds. So again, these 11 songs are Into the Abyss, which is a instrumental which opens up the album. Born for War, the title track, Code Black, Rest in Pieces, Godhead, Hate Box, Antitheist. I hope I pronounced that one right. And then Suicidology, and then finally End of the Storm, which is the outro for this album, and then finally here their cover of Motorhead's Bomber, which actually features some guest session musicians here. We got Tom Angel Ripper providing vocals on here. Again, he actually does some duets with Cy Keeler. Tom Angel Ripper, best known for being Sodom. And then on guitar, guest guitar playing from none other than Phil Campbell himself, who at least was in the band when Motorhead was still a band and Lemmy was still alive. And of course, all the other two original members and all the other ones at least were somewhat still alive. So it's still just great. They were able to cover this whenever some of these guys were still around. But Phil Campbell, again, was one of the most long-lasting guys from Motorhead since 1984. So very cool. So that they provide their stuff to this cover, to Onslaught's cover of Bomber. All right. So as far as my history, or at least just my history with this album and me growing up with this album, I'll definitely tell you, at the time I was still very new to Onslaught. I was, of course, was introduced to Onslaught through The Force and then Power from Hell, and I listened to those albums a lot, especially The Force. That is still my absolute favorite album from Onslaught, but Power from Hell is equally just as good. I mean, I even went and spotlighted that album on this channel. Just last year for October, I spotlighted Power from Hell. It's just a classic thrash metal album. Same goes for The Force, which I hope to also spotlight this year as well. So very cool. But at the time, I wasn't completely familiar with a lot of their newer albums. If anything, the only new album they really had out was Killing Peace in 2007. Which was really the first album Psykiller had sang on since The Force. I mean, he did sing on there does exist a version of In Search of Sanity with Psykiller's vocals, but at this point, I don't know if it's ever really seen the light of day. I know that he did his version of, like, for example, some of the songs on the album, at least two of them, including their cover of AC/DC's Let There Be Rock, did get released prior to the album, but really at the end of the day, what really made it on and what did get released was the version with Steve Grimmett, again, of Grim Reaper and Chateau and so on. Just that was and that really was the last Onslaught album until 2007, which again, Killing Peace pretty much was a comeback album from Onslaught, and this was the second album after. This was the follow-up. So again, it came out in January 28th of 2011 here in the States, and I just remember in February, after taking a trip, after again coming back home from just for some of the family members here, went to Morro Bay for at least just to spend some time around the beach and so on. After we got back, immediately, I think we tried to go to a record store near there, but we didn't even get to something. It was, or was it? I think it was, yeah, it was Morro Bay, and we didn't really get to, or was it Morro? Did we do that then? I think we ended up then doing a, you know what? I think now I remember. We took it was to, oh god, the Winchester Mystery House. I actually kind of went there and to check it out. But we tried to go to, I think, the record store there. We tried to do something, and it ultimately something didn't happen. So eventually we just went to the record store in Fresno. Again, we went back there and just went there, and really the albums I ended up picking up at that place at Rasputin that year, that month of February, was, for one, the new Onslaught here, and Omega Wave from Forbidden, because that was the comeback album that was released just back in October of 2010, and I was very interested in how that album was going to sound, since I was still a huge fan of Forbidden Evil. Of course, when I finally did listen to Omega Wave, I wasn't completely all that thrilled with the album. I'm just not a huge fan of that album. I wasn't really. And the other album that I picked up there was Evil Never Dies from Toxic Holocaust. And really, if you ask me what was the two of the three CDs that I picked up at Rasputin at that time, I'll tell you, the two that I really listened to the most was Evil Never Dies from Toxic Holocaust and Sounds of Violence here from Onslaught. Again, of the two new albums from the classic thrash metal bands that I had picked up, again, Forbidden and Onslaught, for me, hands down, I thought Onslaught really brought it with Sounds of Violence here. I mean, yes, it was a very modern, very updated. It really didn't sound a whole lot like, really classic Onslaught. Like, for example, it really wasn't The Force Part 2, but for a modern album from Onslaught, I thought this album was still great. I actually still like this, if any. And the when I did in 2020, when I did my favorite thrash metal albums of at least of the 2010s, this was my number one pick for at least that for that thrash metal list. I did pick this one as my number one favorite. This just had it. This album was just everything about this one. It was mean. It was aggressive. This was almost this was almost the album that I think Slayer wished they had recorded after, for example, at least Divine Intervention or so on, or even Seasons in the Abyss. Again, this is everything. I mean, this album, of course, by no means any means, this album, bar none, blew away every one of the Slayer albums after either Divine Intervention or even Season in the Abyss. I mean, I don't mind Divine Intervention. I thought that was actually a good album. That was probably the last good album from Slayer. After that, it was just it just seemed downhill from there, and this album just blew away most of those albums. I mean, I will definitely take this album in a heartbeat over God Hates Us All, or Christ Illusion, and World Painted Blood, and even the most recent Slayer album, Repentless. I'll take Sounds of Violence over that. This was a great thrash metal album. Again, it's like there was a point where Onslaught was considered Britain's answer to Slayer, but when it came to, of course, the 2010s and so on, and the more present day, I think Onslaught actually decided to be Slayer more than Slayer was Slayer. It's like they actually outdid Slayer in their own way. This was just a great thrash metal album in the modern times. It was a good album. It's just, again, one of my favorite tracks off this one, as far as really standouts, would be like Born for War and the title track and Godhead. Those are some of my favorite songs off this one. Even I actually did dig songs like Hate Box and Antitheist, and then Rest in Pieces. Those are, to me, some of the standout songs. I mean, of course, definitely the go in. It does begin with Into the Abyss, which is kind of a marching like intro, and it's really kind of it's a good way. It's like building suspense because it's getting you ready for what's about to come. When it finally goes into Born for War, after that marching beat and so on, and the just the whole thing, yeah. You're just in for an absolute monster of a ride. It's a great thrash metal album from beginning to end. I like it. I mean, yes, it's got some of those modern touches, and yes, there you can see some similarities to modern Slayer, but again, it's done way more better than what Slayer was putting out at this point. This was a good modern thrash metal album. Again, Onslaught is one of those British thrash metal bands that doesn't get a whole lot of respect, or even in terms of what they were able to record after In Search from Insanity. They just don't get enough credit, because this album, again, it's very Slayer-like, but again, it's still more Slayer than Slayer was at this point. This is just a good, solid thrash metal album. Of course, the album ends with End of the Storm, which is a very calm piano-like outro. I mean, it's again, after the brutality that was just unleashed on you, you're just literally destroyed with the fucking sledgehammer for the most time of this album. So with an intro or an outro like End of the Storm, it's like the breather. Again, you probably are just wiping the sweat. Your hair is all frizzled up. You're completely whiplashed. So in many ways, after that, it's like the end of a roller coaster. You're now trying to catch your breath. That's, in many ways, I really can summon up the outro for this album, which is titled End of the Storm. It's just great. So finally, with this copy, I gotta talk about their cover of Motorhead's Bomber, and they do a good job of paying homage to, again, one of the bands that really inspired Onslaught in the first place. I mean, without bands like Motorhead or Raven or even Venom, and just some of those classic British metal bands, again, Onslaught wouldn't have existed. This is just a good way to end it, and it's a good album, a good cover. They do a good job, and of course, again, just the inclusion of having Tom and Ripper again. Another one, Sodom, also was inspired a lot by Motorhead. They were Germany's answer to Motorhead in many cases too. So they having him along was very good. And then Phil Campbell, again, he never really played on the original track, but he was a part of Motorhead at that point, and he did a good job providing a lot of guitar solos as well. This was a good cover track, and again, it's a very good track, and so it ends it. This is, to me, a good track, and I mean, there's still plenty of that classic Onslaught feel that really creeps in there. I mean, on songs, for example, like Born for War, the title track, and Godhead, and so on. There's still plenty of that sort of classic sort of thrash. You still get that. It's just a great, solid album. So after the Sounds of Violence, after this album, we do get some members do leave. Steve Grice ends up leaving the band after this one. Andy Roser Davies would leave the band, and same goes for it's actually Jeff Williams would stay in the band for, again, because he plays on the last year's album, Generation Antichrist, which I know that there are a few people that seem to really ask me on who wanted me to review, or some said that was our favorite thrash metal album of 2020. Yeah, interesting, but again, more power to them. But that's there. Of course, Psych Healer. He would stay in the band for at least until 2013's 6, or VI, but it's 6. It stands for 6. After that album, it seemed like it was uncertain of what was his time in the band. Because of that tour for that album, he was somewhat replaced by ex-Anthrax singer Neil Turbin. He was at least taking Psych Healer's place for that tour. He would be back in the band, but eventually he would leave. And then in 2020, he was definitely out of the band for sure. So, and of course, since then, as far as the members we got, Mick Moran, or Horian, is the name of the drummer, who did replace Steve Grice, but eventually he would be out of the band. And then on last year's album, Generation Antichrist would be officially replaced by James Perry. So there you go. And of course, other members such as Wayne Dorman, who again is been in the band. I would say, let me look this guy up. I know I'm kind of fucking up a lot of this. Yeah, been in the band since 2020. So they again, it's just an evolving door of newer members. And of course, nowadays the singer is David Garnett, who debuted on last year's Generation Antichrist. So, but Nige Rocket is still the most consistent member. So there you go. So this album has, again, it's at 10 years for this album. If you have any memories of listening to this album, and so with that, if you have any memories and if you have any thoughts on this album, and if your thoughts since then have changed or they have stayed the same, again, you can leave those thoughts in the comment section below. But if you haven't even heard this album, if you really want to get a good taste of modern day Onslaught, this album I think you would do no wrong with. This is a good, solid modern day Onslaught album. It's a good modern day thrash metal album. This is still my favorite of the more modern day Onslaught albums. Just personally me, I like this album. Of course, I've got a sentimental feel to this album. It is just a good album. So there you go. All right. So for next week's album of the week pick goes to Hell with God from Deicide. I know that is probably a kind of an interesting choice, because really you would expect me to really, let's say, spotlight the first Deicide album, or even, for example, the second one, which would be, right now I'm starting to kind of forget the name of this, which was, I think, Legion. I think it was titled Legion, which is also a good death metal album. But Again, To Hell With God also reached its 10th anniversary, and I feel like since I've got a sentimental, I'm very sentimental towards that album, so again, it's probably a little biased. Either way, I'm going to spotlight and I'll give my thoughts on what I think of that album. So with that, that's until next week. So I hope all of you enjoyed this week's Album of the Week pick. So with that, hope all of you enjoyed. Zip Zip Thrash is Sam out. And I'll see you all later. Take care, everyone.